Hello, everybody. I'm Big John, and this week on Liberty Lens, President Trump is talking about acquiring Greenland again. Mind you, not partnering with Greenland, owning Greenland. The question isn't whether or not this is a strategic move for the United States. It's whether America's about to normalize empire talk against a NATO ally. This week on this episode, Mike Maat and I are breaking down what Greenland is in terms of its relationship to the US, what we already have there, and why consent is a bright line you can't cross. All right, everyone, welcome again to the show. As we said, this is going to be an episode all about Greenland. Mike, how are you feeling? You ready to talk about Greenland today?
I am ready to talk about Greenland. I've never been to Greenland. As you know, just a couple of months ago, I spent a very brief period of time in Iceland, which is also going to come up in our conversation today.
Excellent. We're talking like Norsemen, Vikings with horned helmets and stuff like that, Mike.
Yes, we are, because the other thing that's going to come up in our conversation is the 13th and 14th centuries.
Fair enough. All right. A history lesson, politics, everything all in one. All right. Just a reminder to everybody watching the episode, please smash the like and subscribe buttons if you're enjoying this podcast. Even if you're not, smash them anyway. Help us out a little bit. All right, Mike, let's start this off. The president has always been enamored with the United States owning Greenland. This goes back to his first term. When he first floated the idea out there, people just treated it like a typical Trump desire, something he blurts out, kind of waits to see how people react, and then he decides to either move forward or walk it back. Well, in this term, surrounded by folks like Stephen Miller, who's a much more efficient sort of imperialist mouthpiece than the president had in that position in the first term, the president is deadly serious about this now. So let's start with a very basic understanding, Mike. Why does President Trump have such an affection, such a desire to own Greenland?
Yeah, affection may be the wrong term, but he does want to own Greenland. We're going to have to spend some time defining terms. I don't think anyone actually knows what he means or what anyone would mean by the term own when it comes to Greenland, right? Does that look like a protectorate? Does it look like Puerto Rico? Does it look more like Guam? Does it look more like Alaska? Are we talking about making it a state? There's only 60,000 people in Greenland. So for that reason alone, it's different than most examples that we can come up with. The reason he's so interested in Greenland, there's two basic fundamental reasons. One is that Greenland has a plethora of rare earth minerals. And that means that extracting those minerals is very important to the U.S. economy and very important to U.S. defense initiatives in terms of developing the weapons that rely on certain rare earth elements. So the United States needs access to those and wants to be able to control who else has access to those. At the moment, Australian and Canadian companies control the great bulk of the extraction from Greenland of rare earth minerals, but the great bulk of those are processed by China. And the United States government is afraid that these Australian and Canadian companies, the self-governing apparatus in Greenland or the Kingdom of Denmark, that none of those organizations will stand up to China if the United States needs them to negotiate in hardball fashion with China in terms of getting rare earth elements. The second important aspect of Greenland is geography, right? Where it is. It represents a giant island sitting in an ocean that has to be traversed if you were coming from Russia to the United States. If you were a ship, if you were a fishing boat, or if you were a missile, you would have to cross either water controlled by Greenland or Canada, or Iceland, which is why that's going to come up, or airspace controlled by one of those three nations. So the United States needs to be able to put Navy bases there, needs to be able to control the water around Greenland up to and including right up to the shore, right? We only have one base there now. We used to have 17. We only have one base there now with flexibility to increase that. But we also need to be able to put radar facilities there. There are those who argue that that is an old-fashioned way of looking at things because we can replace all of that with satellite, but nonetheless, there needs to be an integrated, multidisciplinary, multi-layered technological projection in and around Greenland that coordinates radar, satellite, bases, and control of the seaways.
So, and by the way, the seaway is an interesting one because due to climate change, which under normal circumstances, the president would tell you does not exist. But he's
this week, apparently, in the White House.
I was going to say, apparently this week it's being used as the reason that due to climate change, the sea lanes are now different. Like they've been modified, and therefore Greenland becomes even more strategic in terms of those shipping lanes and
because more ships can get through more places.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Now you've kind of laid out, and we'll get into what to do with this strategic importance because, yeah, I mean, I agreed it sits in a very strategic location, Greenland. But let's talk about Greenland itself. It's not, as you said, like we're saying, oh, we found this little unmanned island or something like that, and we decided we're going to put a base there. It's unclear as to who owns it. Greenland is a sovereign nation. It got home rule in 2009. I'm sorry, it got home rule in 1970. Home rule in 1979 and self-government in 2009. I'm sorry, I just had to check those dates. But it's been a colony of Denmark since 1721. So perhaps an analogy would be, think of Greenland sort of like Canada, not in size and scope, but in terms of, Canada, I guess technically is part of the British Empire, but for all intents and purposes, it's its own nation. Would you say it's fair to view Greenland in that manner, like in terms of its relationship?
Not quite. It's more like Hong Kong in some sense. It still considers itself a self-governing part of the Kingdom of Denmark.
Fair enough. Okay.
Semi-autonomous, largely autonomous, but semi-sovereign. Maybe that's the way. I don't know of another relationship that's all these relationships are unique, right?
Right.
But I don't think there's any relationship that's exactly like this. And maybe it feels a little bit more like Puerto Rico, right? Puerto Rico has its own self-governing apparatus, sends its own team to the Olympics, has its own flag, but heaven help anyone who attacks Puerto Rico because they are defended by the Department of Defense of the United States government.
Right, exactly. So now this is where we get confused a little bit. And maybe nobody's confused in the Trump White House because apparently sovereignty means very little to them, as we saw in Venezuela.
Right. You and I spend all these minutes defining the relationship, and the White House doesn't care at all.
Right, exactly. So help me out here because I think, and let's be fair, this is not the first time that a purchase of Greenland has been proposed, right? I think Harry Truman proposed it right after World War II.
Truman and Eisenhower both had eyeballs on it, and that's what led to the treaty that was put in place in the 50s and then was updated some 20 years ago or so that is extremely flexible toward accommodating what the United States wants to do there.
Right, and I think that's the key here, right? It's not like Greenland has been adversarial to the U.S., it's not like the U.S. hasn't asked for anything that Greenland has refused to give them in terms of bases, a military presence, or anything like that. It literally, some people said, let's buy them. I think Truman offered, what was it, $200 billion in gold to Denmark, and it was rejected. But I think it's different here, and I think it's different because you'll see a lot of MAGA supporters say, "Hey, nobody complained when Truman tried to buy Greenland. Nobody complained when Eisenhower tried to buy Greenland." But I think the context is different, right?
Well,
Here,
the context is different, but also to your point, just to jump in real quick.
yeah, sure.
The reason it's different is because Greenland said no, Denmark said no, and we didn't invade them.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at, right? The difference is here. I think the context around why people are taking this a lot more seriously, or why Europe is so upset about this, is that the president isn't like, "Hey, are you guys interested in selling?" It wasn't just that. It was like, "Hey, are you guys interested in selling or else?" It's always like gunboat diplomacy or mafia tactics where it's like, "Hey, it would be a shame if something happened to your nice country if you didn't sell to us," right?
And worse than the mafia, at least the mafia is, historically speaking, was always afraid of being quoted, right? They were always afraid of an FBI,
right.
microphone under the flower vase at the
Right.
restaurant.
Right.
I wish I did not know where by which I speak, having had a client go to jail because of a microphone under the vase at the restaurant where they had lunch.
Mm.
But the Trump administration does not seem to worry at all about being quoted, right? They ask Caroline Leavitt, they ask President Trump, "Are we taking military action off the table?" No, we're not. And then White House officials, "No, military options are always available to the commander-in-chief." So it's actually, I love your analogy, but it's actually a little bit more explicit than the mafia.
You're right. It's as if you're in the room where the mafia is making the threat. But I think that's very important, because for all the apologists, this is not simply a let's find out if we can make a deal here. This is literally Greenland, and no one's doubting this, has very real strategic value to the United States. But the president's approach, and we've talked about this before, is very ham-fisted, very ham-handed. Like, for example, Stephen Miller, like, sometimes I don't understand what comes out of his mouth. It's like, what? You think just because a boat went to Greenland 500 years ago or 200 years ago, and some settlers went there, that makes it the property of Denmark? Well, I think Piers Morgan had this greatest response. He goes, "Yeah, that describes America too, right?"
It's exactly what I was thinking. And and that started in 1492 by other sovereign nations. It wasn't until we fought a bloody war at the end of the 18th century. Okay, Stephen, let's talk about the difference. Greenland was first settled in the 13th century by the Norse. In the 14th century, the Norwegian kingdom and the Danish kingdom merged, making Greenland a part of that merged kingdom. That's a long time before 1492.
Sure.
It also needs to be said that the good people of Greenland, who would be analogous to Native Americans, wanted to be a part of that kingdom.
They still do.
That's extreme, but they did then. At no point did Native Americans say they wanted to be part of the British Crown,
right,
or part of the French, God forbid, or part of the Spanish Crown, right?
Right.
Maybe some of those would have been good ideas, some of them bad ideas. I don't know, but as a libertarian, I feel it necessary to point out that they didn't decide they wanted to be a part of those European crowns. The Greenlandic people did. Okay, so that's 13th century, 14th century merged with Denmark. In the 18th century, early 19th century, Denmark and Norway split. Norway became a part of merged Sweden, which later on split. But in that split, Greenland was retained by Denmark. So there are a lot of ahistorical, White House officials who are now saying, well, it's only been since the 19th century that Greenland has been part of Denmark. No, it's only been since the 19th century that Greenland was not a part of Norway.
Right.
But since the 14th century, it's been a part of Denmark and part of the crown that merged with Denmark since the 13th century. And in my view, most importantly, the people of Greenland not only decided then and since then, but recently that they want to be a part of the Danish crown. And when they want full independence, right? When Puerto Rico either decides they want to be a state or they want to be completely independent, I'm always sitting in the edge of my chair wondering, why this gray area? Why don't we go one way or another? Well, the Greenlandic people will decide for themselves. There's only 60,000 of them. John, this is one of the things that always flabbergasts me, is that for an organization that purports to be so good at politics, and which has had moments of brilliance when it comes to politics, right? The White House, the Trump White House, Trump and the people with whom he surrounds himself. The number of federal employees so far surpasses the population of Greenland that if you wanted to politic those people, right, all you need is a referendum, right? How hard can this be? This is like the President of the United States winning an election in like Pompano Beach, Florida, right? But they are doing everything they can think of to piss off the Greenlanders.
Well, to your point, there are rules in place after that agreement in 2009, the Self-Government Act, which, the Greenland can become first of all, they're recognized as a, quote, people. And I know that sounds crazy, but in terms of the UN, if you're recognized as a people, it gives you a certain amount of sovereignty in terms of world recognition. But they also have mechanisms, as you said, by referendum and whatnot, by which they can become their own independent nation, break away from the Kingdom of Denmark, as you mentioned. There's some like financial and trade agreements that get triggered and all that. But there is a legal agreed upon process as recently as 2009, where if the folks in Greenland wanted to do so, they could split. Here's the problem Trump faced, despite what is said. Most polls, if you go into Greenland, show that 80% of the people overwhelmingly want to stay with Denmark. They don't even want to become their own country. They want to remain a part of the Danish kingdom.
And the other 20% doesn't want to come to doesn't want to be part of the United States.
Right. Though it's not assuming that that minority wants to be a U.S. the 51st state. They just want, like, maybe they want independence or whatever, Right. But the point is that there's not this overwhelming populist movement in Greenland that says we want to become the 51st state. And once again, we see in my opinion, the completely dumb approach that the Trump messaging team has put out there. They did it with Canada, where they're like, Canada should be our 51st state. Now they're like, well, Greenland, everybody in Greenland wants to be part of the U.S. You'll see one or two people that they've paid off in Greenland to say what they have to say. So Mike, let me just fast forward this a little bit, because again, if you talk about the Trump administration wanting to own Greenland, to your point, what does that mean? Because
I'm having a sip out of my Scottish coffee cup.
There you go.
Painting of the battle for independence.
Nice. Very apropos. So I would have had my Alfred E. Newman mug since we're talking about President Trump, for those that understand. I won't go any further. But anyway, but when you say own, even like as a libertarian or just even as a human being, what does that mean? What does it mean for those 60,000 people? Are they property? Who do they like? I don't understand what that means exactly. Like, let's say Trump, whatever his concept of ownership is, does that mean those 60,000 people become U.S. citizens? Do they immediately fall under the protection of the U.S.? Do they get all citizenship rights? Do they get handouts? Are they eligible for Medicare and Medicaid, which seems to be a problem with immigrants and you folks being introduced to the U.S.?
Right.
Where do we get the money for this? Right? We're constantly told how much money we don't have. Even the president with his
Let me
is,
buy myself a moment here.
Yeah, while
I try to figure out what's in Trump's brain.
Right.
I'll be back to you in a couple of hours.
I'll be happy to rant for a little bit. But my point is this.
Look,
I don't understand what that means.
The answer is nobody knows.
Okay.
And I think that that's hugely important because the president isn't articulating it, right? Because he's not trying to win those people's votes. And I think that that's the great irony here, is only 60,000 people. If you were trying to win them over, obviously he's not. But let me emphasize the obviousness of this.
Right.
If you were trying to win them over, you would have answers to all of these. Right? Okay, you people, we're going to control you in the same way as what? We control Puerto Rico, the same way we control Guam, the same way we control the state of Maine, or the same way that we control Venezuela. Which is, Mr. President, which is the format that we're going to follow here? Because if you really wanted to, not only would you spell it out, but you would sweeten the deal. It's only 60,000. You could send them all checks for thousands of dollars, right? And it would be a lot more affordable than ruining our economy with tariffs, which is the next thing that you and I are going to talk about. And I think that a proposal for only 60,000 people, it's got to say, look, we're going to give you all American passports, and we're going to have a special rule that says you can keep your Greenlandic passport. We'll honor Danish passports. Well, you can remain part of the EU if the EU will have you and have your European Union passport. Wow. Because a lot of people consider that to be one of the most valuable booklets on the planet, second only to an American passport. You can have both. You are going to be citizens of the state of Maine, right? And that's going to entitle you to all kinds of government programs. And you're going to be able to go, I've talked to the governor, you're going to be able to go to the University of Maine for free. Right? We're going to sweeten this deal. And by the way, I'm throwing in 3 nights at the Hilton.
At Mar-a-Lago,
Yeah, at Mar-a-Lago. All of you can come to Mar-a-Lago for a weekend. There's only 60,000 of them.
And you only need 30,001.
Well, good point. You wouldn't even have to have all 60,000 at Mar-a-Lago. You'd only need 30,000.
Right. Well, again, I think the context here of the other actions of the administration play a big part here, because it almost seems like there's a large chunk of the Trump administration that's dedicated itself to being the biggest bully on the block, right? So, for example, a good concern. Are you going to treat us like Venezuela, where literally before any sort of provisional government or even a puppet president was installed in Venezuela, Trump was divvying up the oil assets? And again, out in the open, Mike, not behind closed doors, not some backroom deal. Hey, Exxon, what are you going to do down there? Hey, Chevron, what are you going to do down there? Okay, you'll get this much. You'll get this much. It reminds me of, Rothstein in The Godfather 2. Like, there's a little piece for everybody in Cuba. Pass around the gold cake, pass around the cake. Get it. It's that sort of feeling. So if you're Denmark, if you're Greenland, you're saying like, look, they kind of invaded a sovereign nation. They took it over for its resources. Sounds familiar. They didn't even bother to set up a government. The safety of the people means nothing to them down in Venezuela. And then within, 24 or 48 hours, Mike, President Trump on Wikipedia had edited his page to say, and President of Venezuela. Right? President of the United States and President of Venezuela.
The most insulting thing that he could have thought of, if you were trying to build a bridge to those people, which is what you should have been doing.
Correct.
I can think of no greater insult than to tell them, you've had elections. I don't care about them.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
Not only do I not care about the legitimate result, I don't care about the illegitimate result. I've just removed your illegitimate head, and I replaced him with the illegitimate number 2 instead of the legitimate. So I've messed this all up for you, and we really don't care. We haven't set a timeline. And we haven't talked about how to make your lives better. So
and it
if you're in Greenland, right?
exactly, yeah,
Why would you expect life would be any better as citizens of the United States? They haven't been told what would happen to their government or their governance structure, whether they would be independent, what ownership means. By the way, it is also true that the Australian and Canadian mining companies have not been told what this would mean. Would they be nationalized by the federal government of the United States? I would hope not, but that would be the least of the weirdness
right,
that we're talking about. Would American companies come in? No American company I know of has said they've had discussions with the White House and what that would look like. And here's the trillions of dollars that we would invest. And
right,
here's the timelines. Nobody is discussing any of these things whatsoever. And by the way, nor has the United States, and this may be the most important of all of the things that haven't happened, the United States has not engaged recently with either the government in Copenhagen or the Greenlanders in a discussion of new American bases. Because as you pointed out, there is enormous flexibility in the existing treaty. Up until 20 minutes ago, both the Greenlanders and the Danes were completely open to
yes,
new bases there. Both governments would have to sign off, but there was every reason to believe that they would until the United States pissed them off. Now you have to wonder if President Trump were, and this is the great irony, if the president decided, you know what, I got ahead of my skis. I misspoke a little bit. I'm sorry if I offended you. We got off on the wrong foot. Let me reset, right? Obviously, this is not something you can imagine President Trump saying, but work with me. If he were to say, let's have an adult conversation across the table about opening some new bases in Greenland. Our treaty says, that you're open to this idea. It's just a matter of crossing some T's and dotting some I's. We want to go back to some of the places where we were before. Here's the equipment we want to bring. Here's the reason. I would not be shocked if
right.
the Greenlanders and possibly even the Danes said, you know what? Go pound sand.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that a lot of people understand who are cheering the president's actions, not just here, but just the pattern he's shown in his first year in office, how much he's pissing people off and how much he's ruining relationships. Like, capitulation is not loyalty. Capitulation is not negotiation. It's not diplomacy. If I put a gun to your head and said, let's negotiate about this deal, that's not real negotiation, right? That's fear. And there's a lot of people in the Trump administration, again, I could think of Stephen Miller, Vice President Vance to some extent, who love it. Hey, we're the biggest kid on the block. Why not throw our weight around? Why not threaten violence? Why not threaten war? Why not, coercion is our friend, baby. Let's use it while we still can. And Mike, when it comes to Greenland, I mean, if you look at some of these options for acquiring Greenland, basically it comes down to four, right? There's the straight purchase option. We give you a whole bunch of cash. You give us Denmark. That's unlikely to fly.
Greenland,
First of all,
right.
Greenland, sorry. Denmark is unlikely to agree to that. But B, we're on the clock here. Because if the Democrats win the House controls the purse strings. They could just very easily say, we don't allocate the money you agreed to for this, right? So if you were to go straight purchase, this would have to get done by the end of the year. And you and I know.
Right. And at that point, you're not offering a weekend at Mar-a-Lago. You're offering all of Mar-a-Lago if you think that you're going to find the resources to trade away.
Exactly. So that doesn't seem like an likely thing, given the timing and all that. Then there's the like gunboat diplomacy type of thing, like sort of annexation under duress, where, and we'll talk about this now. President Trump has said his favorite tool, which is we're putting on a 10% tariff on Denmark, Sweden, Norway, plus any European country that dares disagree with our purchase
Sweden,
or acquisition.
Finland, Norway,
Yeah,
right? Plus Germany, France, the United Kingdom,
right. Basically,
and
yeah,
Denmark, the
yeah.
8 nations that had troops in Greenland last week. Think about that. 8 nations put troops in Greenland last week. And as we speak, more troops from Denmark are
Yeah.
offloading
Yeah.
onto Greenland.
Right. And by the way, he's putting a 10% tariff as a form of punishment against NATO allies again. And to your point, Denmark saying, like, okay, we'll move more troops there just in case someone gets any crazy ideas. Not that anyone seriously thinks that Denmark can stave off a U.S. Military invasion if it ever came to that. But it is just indicative of how ridiculous this sounds, right? So starting February 1st, American taxpayers will once again have the pleasure of paying a surcharge so that the president can acquire Greenland. It's an extra 10% surcharge tariff, again, paid by American importers. I keep saying this because apparently the idea doesn't seem to resonate with MAGA Republicans.
It's a tax on Americans.
It's a tax on Americans. It's not a tax on the countries you're targeting. Starting February 1st, 10%. If Greenland isn't in our hands by June 1st, the tariff increases to 25%. It's the same. It's the same playbook run over and over again. So, Mike, talk to me about the wisdom or the practicality of the president's gunboat diplomacy here, tariffing people until we get it.
It's absolutely ridiculous. First of all, you're right that not the Danish or the Norwegians or the Swedes or the Finns or the British, the Germans, or the French,
right?
None of them think that they're going to go to war with the United States. But with the Danes have a lot of internal politics they got to take care of, right? They got to look like they're standing up for Greenland.
Right.
But they also have, internal, external to the European Union, external to Copenhagen politics. They need to stand with their European brothers, and the European brothers need to stand with them, which is to say, we are our own league. We're not letting the United States call the shots. At some point, you've got to draw the line. And I think that this brings up a host of really weird issues. First of all, with Finland increasing the number of troops in Greenland, what it's basically saying is, if the United States is going to take Greenland by force, there's going to be some shooting. And that's going to be ugly. And that's going to have two big ramifications. One is, for all practical purposes, NATO will be over.
Sure.
NATO has been on the decline. A lot of us have felt that NATO should have been reconfigured or done away with completely anyway, that it was possibly a good idea when it was originated, and it has outlasted its sell-by date. But it wouldn't be merely NATO itself that goes, but that alliance with European powers. That's a big deal. The other is that the politics of American troops killing Danish troops on Danish-controlled Greenland would be a political specter so bad that whatever soft power the United States has left, a good half of it would be flushed down the toilet.
Probably more, Mike, I would say.
Yeah,
probably more.
Possibly more. And consider what that implies for so many other situations. The United States has, for a long time, more than a century, made the case that our role in the world is motivated and justified by what we call American exceptionalism, which is not that we're the most powerful, it's not that we're the smartest, but that we are based on a liberal democracy that honors liberty, that honors each individual's right to self-determination, and that flows upward to governments that control at the pleasure of the electorate.
Right.
If American exceptionalism is real, then there is soft power, which is to say influence around the world, that will be completely erased if the Trump administration demonstrates that it really doesn't believe that. And the reason that this is so important is because there are other examples around the world where the European Union, what are soon to be former NATO allies, European governments are going to be deciding what kind of relationships they want to have. Why would you partner with the United States instead of with Russia if both governments believe basically the same thing, which is that might makes right? Why would you not want to partner with China? When Washington says don't, it effectively says you got to choose. You're going to be in the sphere of influence of the Chinese government, or you're going to be in the sphere of influence of Washington. Up until now, that's been an easy call, right? The United States government is big and powerful. The United States Defense Department is big and powerful. It's a liberal democracy. We have so much in common. And the rule of law means that investment back and forth is more likely to turn a good, stable ROI. If the United States no longer projects power based on either American exceptionalism or even the rule of law and decides it's merely a matter of might makes right, and they're willing to impose tariffs on friends to get their way, why would you choose the United States over China?
That's, Mike, you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of, I use the word patriots in quotes because I think if you use the word patriot today in America, it means something completely different. And I think a lot of people are just like, hey, we're fed up with our decline. We need to make America great again. And as I've always said, like, when were we not great? We were still the greatest economy in the world by a factor of 4 or 5. Like, these are just facts, right? The second greatest economy in the world, we're still 4 times larger than them, even today, right? We don't need to change anything. In terms of as you said, holding the moral high ground to, and I understand we're not perfect, but to the extent that you said, we could trust that if you made an agreement with the U.S., for the most part, we'd honor it. You could get your money.
We would try.
Or at least we would try.
At least we would try.
Or put up the appearance that we're trying.
Now we're trying not to.
Right. Now we're all flat out. And we're starting, Mike, again, we're starting to see the results of the president's so-called hardball MAGA tactics. Not only on the economic front, internally are they failing. Like, you and I have talked a lot about how these tariffs are causing inflation and how, like, coercion is not really investment, right? But now you're seeing other things, right? We talked about last episode that for the first time, I think it was a month and a half ago, Saudi Arabia settled an oil deal with China in the yuan, not the US dollar, in the yuan. And for those that understand how currency settles, that's horrible for the US because it threatens the reserve status of the dollar. Which means a lot of the
business without the American government, without the American currency, and without the American institutions that are set up to conduct international trade.
Right. And if you think that doesn't matter, ask England what happened when the pound sterling was no longer the reserve currency, right? Not too long ago. So that has a real effect. Now we see allies that otherwise would have never considered this. Canada. Let's do more business with China. Why not? Let's voluntarily invite China right to the doorstep of the United States, increase their investment in Canada. Why? Because we're tired of dealing with an unstable president. We're tired of hearing the imperialistic nonsense that comes out of the mouths of people like Vance and Miller. We're tired of that.
Other options. So when Washington imposes these giant tariffs on our exports, we need other options, both in terms of consumption, in terms of sales, and in terms of our supply chain networks.
And by the way, this is a wholly American concept. So when Canada
Yes,
says
it
something
is.
like
We're
this,
the ones that taught this to the world.
exactly. Like, look, what could you be more proud of than say what brought down the Soviet Union in the 80s? Was it nuclear bombs and bullets? No, it was Coca-Cola, rock and roll, and Levi's jeans. We used to say that in the 80s and 90s, Mike, with pride. Free market capitalism brought down the Soviet Union. I mean, we're overstating it a little bit, but you get the point, right?
Both
Trade,
in terms of push and pull.
exactly.
Right. In terms of push, it allowed us as an open economy to make so much money, right? And so much foreign currency to become so wealthy that we could spend so much money on defense, engage in an arms race that Moscow couldn't keep up with unless it absolutely crippled its economy. And then in terms of the pull, we were demonstrating how much better our lives were than theirs and rubbing their noses in it by dangling the possibility of American goods being spread around there that they could barely afford, but they did get a chance to see it, touch it, smell it, and not be able to afford it. That will bring down a government.
Exactly. And it's ironic that right now, the people who are claiming to be making America great again, to take us back to those years, seem to have gotten in their time machine and overshot their target. They're not back to the Reagan years. They're not back to the Eisenhower years, Mike. They're back, again, as we've said, to the 17th century, the 18th century, the mercantilist view of things. We're back to blockades. We're back to might makes right. We're back to wherever there's shiny metals in the ground, we have to aggressively own that ground. So
we're
Mike,
back to Teddy Roosevelt diplomacy. And, Isabella, Queen of Spain, economics.
Right. So Mike, we talk to me about, before we go on to sort of like summarize, I want to focus a little bit more on the tariffs. We mentioned them. There's a bad idea. Let's say those 10% tariffs actually do go forth on February 1st, the specter of the June 1st, 25% tariffs. What does the average American expect out of that? And then tell me, what does the administration expect out of that?
I think the average American expects that it's going to be resolved because so many of these threats have been resolved. The problem is that it dovetails with a disappointment on behalf of the American voter, both in terms of how inflation has gone, the contribution to inflation has been made by certain tariffs, the chaos, the unpredictability. By the way, the market is down over 1% as we speak today, based on the specter of these tariffs, as well as disinvestment in the United States. But also, it dovetails with the disappointment of the American voter in terms of the administration exerting force around the world and what it means for our standing in the world, our ability to use soft power as a form of influence without militarism. Again, the irony here is that by threatening military force, we so undermine our ability to influence people without it that we'll end up having to use it if you're really just hell-bent on acquiring Greenland come hell or high water. And a lot of Americans are disappointed by this. I think it's a real problem for the Republican Party come November. You remember a few episodes ago, we were making predictions for the year. And I said it's completely possible that the president gets on message, talks about affordability, and holds the House of Representatives. Well, I need to say, I said if, because it doesn't look like the administration is going to get on message, talk about affordability, avoid tariffs, help lower costs, control spending, and thereby control the House come November. I think we as a party are on a very bad political path.
And I'll also remind you that I said he wouldn't be able to get on message. So I'll crow about that.
By myself a moment here.
Yeah, go ahead. No, but to that point exactly, the political fallout for the president, right? Because he was already in a tough spot when it came to Republicans holding the House this year, right? We can't. At least I've been constantly saying the only reason I'll say if that they even have a chance of holding the House to buck historical trends is that the Democrats are wholly incompetent, right? As a party,
Right.
they're incompetent with their messaging.
And we've been counting on that for a long time, but
exactly
may run out.
Now, though, I think outside of your roughly 1/3 of the Republican Party that's fully MAGA aligned, that the president, as he once boasted, could shoot someone on Park Avenue and not get arrested.
Well, not lose votes. He might get arrested, but he wouldn't lose votes.
Right. That 1/3, I think, is you just put them aside. They're going to go with the president no matter what. But then what happens to the rest of the 2/3 of the Republican Party? And I think a lot of that now is focused on things like, well, even the things that someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Lauren Boebert used to crow about and yell about, which was like no new wars, no intervention, taking care of the American people, affordability, to your point. These are issues that the president has shown zero interest in. And when you get into that the president seems to have ignored that in his second term. When you get into all the other people who never supported him to begin with, getting galvanized by what we see in terms of ICE tactics, even to your point, even the people who agreed we have to control our border, right? The next step of trying to forcibly remove up to 14 or 16 million people from the United States, we now see how that actually plays out in reality, what it means to forcibly round up these people and throw them out, that civil liberties get trampled on and whatnot. Come November now, Mike, I don't know if you agree with me, I think the odds of them holding the House, as slim as they were, have actually dropped. And if the president continues to pursue this interventionist, like I want Venezuela, I want Greenland, hey, Canada says they're going to cut deals with China, maybe we need to occupy Canada as well, right? I don't know where this ends with the president. I know a lot of what I said may sound silly, but how silly would it be that we'd have a sitting U.S. president declaring himself the president of Venezuela?
No, you almost can't out-silly the White House. To your point, the observation effects are huge, both internally and externally, both domestically and internationally. In other words, let's talk about politicians for a moment. Politicians in the Republican Party are looking at this, having to decide the extent to which they're going to align themselves with President Trump coming into the November elections, right? And the last few years, as well as during the first Trump presidency, as well as to a certain extent in the intervening years during the Biden administration, Republican elected officials were afraid of running against Trump because he commanded such a force, so much in terms of other people's resources, that he could lead a primary against you. He could endorse your opponent. All kinds of bad things could happen to you if you were to run against President Trump. There are any number of politicians who are trying to decide the extent to which that's still the case. The president is losing soft power inside of the United States and inside of his own party. And what the White House should be afraid of, I don't think that a tipping point has been reached yet, and I don't know whether it will be at all between now and November, but that is what the White House should be worried about, is that once a certain number of politicians come out and say, perhaps politicians that are in relatively purple districts that have to, get a few percentage points from Democrats to stay in power. Once a few of those say, I got to be critical of the way the president has handled the economy and the way he's distracted by foreign policy. Once a few of them say that and are not punished for it in the polls, that's what leads to a tipping point and a run on the Trump brand inside of the Republican Party. That's what they should be worried about. On the external side, internationally speaking, what we need to be worried about is a run on the American brand. Not only, to your point, Canada doing more business with China. The European Union is now talking about the imposition of tariffs on the United States. In other words, those tariffs are going to be reciprocal. right? It's going to be an all-out trade war. And with the United States government saying we can't go back, and the Danes saying we have to honor Greenland's self-autonomy, and the Greenlanders saying, go away, I don't know how that gets resolved. But then there are any other number of folks around the world with whom we need to exert influence that are extremely analogous to Greenland. We mentioned Iceland just for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
The other shipping lanes to the east of Greenland go around Iceland. Iceland is a nation which has legally bound itself from having defense. And they are having a debate right now about whether to change that posture. What's important about that is not that Iceland is going to turn into a world power. What's important about that is that Iceland could become a place that aligns itself with the European Union, the remnants of NATO, whatever NATO turns into in the future. Maybe it'll still be NATO, it'll just be different. Right. Iceland aligns itself with NATO, and now NATO decides it's going to control the sea lanes around Iceland and around Greenland, not the United States. Trump's worst nightmare. Okay, who else is watching this? Taiwan, the Philippines, nations that control sea lanes, access to technology, right? Military bases of the United States, potentially not, depending on politics.
Right.
These sovereign nations, in the case of Taiwan, it's a debate about what your definition of sovereign is and who you're asking. But these nations make decisions based on the popularity of the people with whom they do business. And Washington needs to have enormous influence in these places in order to control sea lanes, in order to be able to put resources there in a hurry in case our defense requires it. Where else do we have places that look like this? What about in the Antarctic? What about places like Chile and Argentina, who are the closest allies to the Antarctic? What are they thinking today? Are they thinking, we need other options besides the United States, because you never know when they might try to shove something down our throat?
Right.
What about Australia? The Australians were already pissed off about the submarine deal. Now they're going to be pissed off about the mining deal in Greenland. And the United States has been saying, oh, Australia, you're so important to our allied relationship and standing tough against China. I got to believe that this week there are a certain number of Australian politicians who are saying, yeah, that would be great. I don't know if I'm coming in on Saturday.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not a matter of waiting Trump out, right? Because they know that Vance has now committed himself. He's the front runner for the Republican nomination in 28. And Vance has committed himself at times almost laughably, because you can say, what's coming out of his mouth? You can see that he doesn't even believe what he's saying. And, that this is it's going to be Trump 2. Right, so they can't wait him out, say, till the end of the.
It could be a very long-term play, and so the idea of building a long-term relationship with the Chinese, it may sound like it takes a long time, but
if it takes you 4 or 5 years, it's probably a worthwhile investment.
It may well be.
Same thing with Russia. Like, let's not forget about them. They're also in this too, scooping people up. So, it's just a confusing policy, I think, Mike, and I think. Again, I'll double down on what I said a couple episodes ago. I don't think this is going to play well politically for Republicans in this year in the midterms. It's, in my opinion, it's just a matter of how bad they fall, right? Is it going to be a complete blue wave? Is it just going to be a few votes? Here's something that's sort of tied to this, but not, and I'll close this and you tell me about it. Sort of a mini referendum is coming up, because I think on February 1st or January 31st, the House has to recommit funds to ICE. And if, like some Republicans, as you're saying, are starting to say, hey, this is a little nuts right now, It doesn't take too many votes, swing votes, and you already have someone like a Massey who's probably going to vote against it. But to allocate funds for ICE to continue the deportation tactics that they've been doing. That comes up in just a couple of weeks. So we'll see how serious the party is about sticking and how loyal they are to President Trump ahead of potentially midterms elections. Because those folks in the House can just stand up and say, we're defunding ICE or we're cutting their budget by 50%, which should be enough to control the border, but not enough to do these state by state, street by street raids, you know. So, and again, we've noted they've grown to be bigger than the U.S. Marines, ICE, in terms of budget and things like that. So I don't know, Mike, closing remarks from you.
I think that there will be opportunities for referenda on the Trump administration. The ICE funding is an interesting example, particularly because there are gray areas that are worth testing and probing by Republican politicians. You don't have to go up or down vote. You can demand that there are certain stipulations, certain rules, as you said, cutting funding for certain activities, requirements for certain procedures to be in place. These are gray areas, compromises that the Republican politicians who have concerns about the way that these things have gone can put into place and then test the waters without putting everything at risk and going for a full, complete split. And to your point, all of this becomes much more viable as the overall electorate loses faith and commitment to the Trump administration for other and seemingly unrelated reasons. The Trump administration is losing its influence both domestically and internationally, and it's not helping either the president or the United States economy.
I agree with you, Mike. Some interesting times ahead. Let's see how the president and his administration decide to navigate this going forward. It'll be interesting, but we'll be here to talk about it. All right, everyone. You've been watching Liberty Lens. Thank you for joining us again for this episode. Don't forget, you can follow Mike Termott. His X handle is right there. You can follow me. My X handle's right there. Whether you want someone serious or you want someone with a little bit more idiotic takes, you can follow us at your discretion. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Until next week, this has been Big John, along my friend and co-host, Mr. Mike Termott. Peace, everyone.